On July 20th, 2015, the United States of America and Cuba reopened their embassies, which ended a stretch of hostile relations that has lasted for over 5 decades.
Hello everyone, I'm Matt Mitridge, the alternate historian. To celebrate the end of this Cold War rivalry, we are going to discuss Cuba's relationship with a North American nation that never was, the Confederate States of America. This is Trope Talk, and today we are going to discuss Confederate Cuba. Confederate Cuba is a term for when an independent confederacy gains control over Cuba. This could be because of a Spanish-Confederate war or a peaceful acquisition, like Alaska was in our timeline. Absolutely. I don't know the exact numbers, but the vast majority of maps I have seen of an independent confederacy show Cuba as a state. Don't believe me? Here are just a few examples. Not really, although I can see why people would think so. Before the American Civil War, early 19th century politicians struggled to keep the peace between the states by maintaining a balance of free and slave states in the Senate. As time went by, this became harder and harder to do.
Some Southerners even wanted to tip the balance in favor of the slave states. Groups such as the Knights of the Golden Circle proposed annexing parts of Latin America and admitting them as slave states. Since slavery was legal in Cuba at the time, it made the island a prime candidate. Thankfully, the Golden Circle was stopped by a true American hero, Nicolas Cage. Others were more proactive and organized military expeditions to take Cuba by force, such as Narcisco Lopez and John Quitman. Plus, there are even native Cubans who fought for the Confederacy. These included Ambrosia Jose Gonzalez, who was present at the Battle of Fort Sumter and worked to defend the South Carolina coast from Union attack, and Loretta Janetta Velasquez, who disguised herself as a man to fight and spy for the Confederacy.
The problem is that the slave states were motivated to increase their numbers so they wouldn't lose their influence in Washington. In a timeline where the Confederacy was independent, there would be no need to add more slave states.
On top of that, not only do you have the problems caused by assimilating a Spanish-speaking and Catholic Cuba into an English-speaking and Protestant Confederacy, but there's also the issue of Cuba's strong abolitionist sentiment. Turns out, when the Cuban people began their long fight for independence back in 1868, one of their main demands was the abolition of slavery. It seems unlikely that the Cubans would be willing to trade one slaveocracy for another in an alternate timeline.
Definitely cliche, and not just because it's implausible, but also because it's extremely lazy. When is the last time you read a Confederate victory timeline, where Cuba's a state, and saw how they had any effect on the country? When was the last time you read about Cuban culture, food, language, music, or anything else having any effect on the South? Any! Before you dismiss the idea of how one state could have such a big impact on an entire country, just consider this. Aloha. Aloha is a word from the native language of Hawaii. English-speaking Americans will know that it means both hello and goodbye. One word has had a profound effect on an entire culture, and that is literally just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Hawaii's impact on the United States as a whole. If Cuba was a state of the Confederacy, it would do more to change the Confederacy than just add a star to their flag. Personally, I feel Cuba is added to the Confederacy just because authors want to expand the Confederacy, and Cuba just happens to be the closest, although the northern tier of Mexico works just as well. To be honest, I don't think they care all that much about Cuba or its people. I even once stumbled upon a timeline where Fidel Castro was listed as the governor of Cuba in the Confederacy. Wow, that is pretty damn lazy.
I also read one theory that says modern Americans feel cheated by the fact that Cuba was never brought into their orbit. Thus, having Cuba be a part of the Confederacy helped plays out an author's geopolitical fantasy. If that is true, don't ever admit it to a Cuban. I doubt they will appreciate it.
Regardless of the reason, if your timeline needs to have Cuba be a part of the Confederacy, do your research. Try to really figure out the cause and effect of having Cuba be part of the Confederacy. It may not cure your work of any cliches, but at least it'll be more interesting to read. Well, that's all I got to say on the topic. If you like what I do, please subscribe, comment, and support me on Patreon. I'm Matt Mitridge, the alternate historian. Bye.